Cool. So let us start. I don't have, I did not prepare any slide because I want to go right into coding and give you something that you can use in your ReactJS or front-end skills into making apps. So I start by introducing myself. My name is Ali. I'm a team leader at Redspace, and I've been working with React since 2015 and 16, end of 2015 actually. Today I'm going to go over React Native, just a little to explain how it works and what it is. And after that, we are going to write some code and create an app that makes API requests and display data in lists and some cool animations. So what's React Native? React Native is a framework that you can use your JavaScript skills to create mobile apps, and it's multi-platform. That means you can write the code and it will run on both Android and iOS. There are other platforms also there, but not officially supported, like Apple TV. So how it works is you write your code very similar to ReactJS, similar to HTML using JSX. And when you run that, it will create a native app for you. That means, for example, here, if you see we have, for example, text, this text will be compiled to native elements text on iOS and native element text elements on Android. So everything will be transformed into native class that is supported and is high performance, specifically for that operating system. On this website, you can see how to start an app or create a React Native app. It has a CLI, which is very easy. I'm not going to explain that. But at the end, I'm going to share with you the complete source code, which is going to be something like this. We are going to write a simple app, making an API call to get lists of GitHub users and show them in a list view with some animation. So let's get started. Opening my VS Code. So I already created an empty app, and I explained how to do that on the GitHub that I'm going to share at the end. So setting up the environment, I have a link here. When you go there, you have different options. You can actually try this app on Windows as well, but you cannot test the iOS part, just the Android. So you can use the CLI to create an empty app, and at the end you will have this. So this is the very basic React Native app created by CLI. This is exactly what I have here. So just going through the folder structure a little bit. So when you create a React Native app, you will have two important folders. One is Android and one iOS. These two contains a complete compilable native application that can run in Xcode and Android. So I have this iOS project open and Android project open in Android Studio. If you are using Windows, you can easily open this folder and run from Android. Let me bring in my emulator. Since we are using JavaScript, this is the basic app. Since we are using JavaScript, it makes life much easier. The development time is much faster because you don't have to wait for compile time, or if you have experience in writing native code, you will have to wait at least 20 seconds, 50 seconds every time you make a change. But here we can see the changes live on both platforms, which is a huge help in terms of time. So I'm going to run, this is the iOS emulator. I'm going to run the code in Xcode so we can see them both side by side. And yeah, this is the basic app. So let's get started with the code. When we create the project, let me just arrange my screen so you can see both of these. So this is the folder. We don't usually make any changes in iOS and Android folder unless we want to add some native library or codes to the project that we will do in Xcode or Android Studio. The JavaScript part is here. The index is the main entry of the app. So it's very similar to the web. So we have app registry and registering main component, which is app. And this is the main screen that we can see here. So everything you see here on the screen is actually defined here. This is the basic created by the template. So let's get started by removing them. I don't need to have any of these because we are going to write our code. Okay, first let me bring back the safe area view. This is a component. The syntax is JSX, but instead of having like in HTML, we have div, span, or other elements. Here we have specific components for the native platform. So this safe area view is actually a simple view that considers these notches at the top of some of the mobile phones. So this actually is a wrapper that will cover this area, which should be accessible to user touches. So I keep that. And to show you how it compiles JSX into native elements, I'm going to start with a button element. I have to add that. Okay, you can see when you're trying this, you will face these errors a lot. So the reason is that I did not import this button, which I'm using here. And my button does not have a title. So title is React. And that's it. Okay. You can see we have two different styles here. This one here is a native iOS button, and this is a native Android button. So we write one code and we get native elements in there. Okay, let's get started with designing our application. So what we are going to have at the end is this list. So we start with implementing the header at the top. So it's very easy. We are going to have, if it was a HTML page, we would use div, but here we have something similar, which is view. So in React Native, we use view. And I can have a text inside, text element, and React Native app, for example. And you can see in real time, it appears here, but it doesn't look nice because it doesn't have any styles. So in React Native, we also have something like styles, CSS styles that we have on web, but it's a little bit different, but very similar. Okay, I'm going to give this view a style. So I can type right here, style, and I can give something similar to what we have on web. So for example, background color of red, like this. And I can see that in real time. But this is not a good idea to have inline style. So I'm going to move that to one style sheet that I have at the bottom. So here I can say styles dot header, and I have to define that style here. Header, I'm going to have a padding of 15 maybe. And it's very nice. You can see the changes in real time. I'm going to minimize this so I have more space to actually show the code. Okay, so I gave it a padding. I'm going to give it a background color as well. Or I can give the background color to the safe view, safe area view. So we have style on this component as well. Styles dot container, for example, and I will give, okay, similar to new CSS, everything here is for positioning, of the layout is flexbox. So I'm going to use flex1 and give it a background color of gray, like this, or maybe darker, like this. Okay. And the header, I'm going to add a border at the bottom. So we have all kinds of styles. The syntax is different, but we have everything that we have on web. So I'm going to use darker color here, this, and border bottom width of 1. Okay, so we have our header here. Then for the content here, I'm going to add another view and give another style. Styles.content, and defining the style here. So a background color of white, and this one. Okay, so we have the content. Now we are going to make an API call to get some results. GitHub actually has one public API that we can use. API that I think I have the link here somewhere. To get list of users, we can call this API. So this API from GitHub will return all the users, all the GitHub users. And we are going to call this and show some information about users in the list. I'm only interested in login, ID, avatar, and link. So for a start, I'm going to define a static record to show you how to install the card info. Like this, I'm going to have, again, I'm going to have avatar URL. I'm going to have HTML URL. And I'm going to render that in a card here. So I'm just copying these values here and avatar URL to display the image of the user, and HTML URL to open a browser link. And syntax error. Okay, we are good. So this is one of the records, for example, and I'm going to render that inside this view. So I'm going to, again, define a view. So I will have a view. I will style this as card, and I have to define that here. Card. I'm going to give it a heading of 10, for example. And I'm going to show data that I have in this info object. So I'm going to use text for now. I'm placing one text to show the login info that's login, another one to show avatar URL, and on the left you can see it appears on the screen, and one for HTML URL. So we are showing all those information. Okay, you can see we can display information from this JSON object on the screen, but it doesn't look good. And let us start with giving this card a background color like this. And okay, we want to show the avatar icon on the left side. As I said, we are using Flexbox here. So I have to change the style. First, let's add the image. So we have an image component. Image is a native, it will be converted to native UI image on iOS and native image on Android. So I'm going to import that, getting rid of this unused import, and image has a source attribute which accepts source as a URI. So we need to have a URI attribute in the source, and I'm going to pass this avatar URL. So we are going to have one image in there which doesn't show up. The reason for that is styling, because I did not give this image any style and it doesn't have any height and width. So I'm going to give this a style. I'm going to use styles dot avatar, for example, and define that here. Avatar, I'm going to give it a width of 64 maybe, and a height of 64. Yeah, there I am. So this is the avatar, and I have more CSS attributes I can use. For example, I want to make these corners a little rounder, so I can use border radius and give it a value of 5, so you can see it applied to the image. But still we have layout issues because we need to show them beside this image. So I'm going to change my card style and change that flex direction to row. That means to have elements in a row. It's a little better, but not good still. So I'm going to have another view on the right side. The layout is very similar. If you have worked on web, you can use the same skills to lay out React Native elements. So I'm going to have another view here, and styles dot, for example, I can say add details. Okay, and in the details, I'm going to define the style here, still using flexbox, flex1, and justify content to be space around. Yeah, that looks good. But by mistake, I'm showing avatar URL, which should be HTML URL. So we have something better. I can give it a little padding or horizontal padding of 10. Should be here in the contents, and it's a little bit better. I can give a style to the text. I can give a style to this one because I don't want to run out of time. I'm going to switch to one of the branches that I have here. I have a bunch of branches you can review step by step. Okay, so here we have styles for this one, and I have written a little code for these to be touchable. In order to make some elements touchable, we have to wrap them in one element, touchable element. So we have, here we use touchable opacity. We have different type of touchables, like touchable highlight. When we touch, it will be highlighted and we can give it a color. We have different touchable elements. When we wrap something with touchable, it will be touchable, and we can write a handler for that. In the handler, what I wrote here is I use linking package that comes with React Native and called the open URL. When I tap on this, it will open this HTML URL in the native browser of the mobile device. So I can see the details there. And I can go back to the app. So it's pretty cool, but it's not using API yet. So to make API calls on web, we have fetch. We have the same function here. When we use fetch, it will be converted to native and will use networking library on the iOS or Android. So what we call there is just a fetch like we do on web, but what will happen at the end is running that code on the native part. So I'm going to switch to the next step, which I have a fetch. Let me explain the code. I haven't saved this, so app.js. Okay, here I created one function, send request, which calls the fetch with that API that we saw here, that returns an array. So you can see easily, it's very similar to web. We are calling fetch and converting that data to JSON and return that back. On the app side, on the render side, we use effect hook. That means whenever this screen comes up, I run this code inside. And I call this send request here, and we are keeping data in a state here. How to render them though? That's the trick. So what I did here, I loop over the array using data.map. So for each item inside that data, I rendered a separate card. I moved the card to this function, render. So it's the same thing that we were doing at first. It's a view with a style of card, image, and some text. And for every single item in the data, we are creating another card here. But the problem is, if you have, for example, 10,000 rows here, it will be it will be rendered out of, it is out of screen, but it is in mobile memory. So it's not performant, and it will cause a lot of lagging, and maybe even we get out of memory errors. So it's not a good idea. On web, it's okay. We usually do this to show the list. But here, we don't do that. It's not a good idea because we have a lot of items out of a screen, but actually taking memory from mobile. It's not good for mobile. So what's the solution for that? The solution is to use a component that is native and is supported by mobile. For example, on iOS, we have UI table view. Yeah, this is the recommended way of showing lists in Swift for iOS. But how we can use that on React Native? We need to change the code and use some components that will be translated into UI view, table view, which is very performant. And what will happen after that is, when you have, for example, 10,000 rows, it only takes memory of the rows that you see in the view. When you scroll, the mobile operating system will reuse those rows and doesn't take more memory. So it doesn't matter how many items you have on the list. It will only take a specific and a static amount of memory. The components we use for that is flat list. I'm going to the next branch. Yeah, here you can see the result is the same, but I used flat list. When I use flat list component here, it will be converted into native UI table on iOS, and we have similar thing for Android, which is high performance and doesn't have the issue that I mentioned. So we all can write codes and achieve something that we want, but it's not always the best way. We need to have a little more knowledge into how it works and how these tags will be converted on native side. Okay, so now we have the list. We are calling the fetch. Let's go and add one delete button here so we can show how to remove one of the item and add animation. So the next branch I have here is this one. I just added one remove, one X button here that we can click to remove items. What it does is, when I call the remove card, yeah, we have one function called remove card. So this is the X button I have. I wrapped it with a touchable so I can touch and tap on it. And the handler will call this function remove card. It's very simple. It just goes inside the array and removes the ID, the data that matches this ID. So I go and find the index in the array. I check if it was found, and I use splice function to remove one of the items from array and set the data back, and it will be updated. So if I tap on this, it should, yeah, remove the items, but it doesn't have animation. The animation, how animation works, it was one of the problems with React Native before, and that was one of the reasons that Airbnb stopped using React Native, because their Airbnb app was written in React Native and they had some performance issues, and there were two main reasons they stopped using React Native, and those reasons are not valid anymore because React Native has changed the threading system. If you refer back to my previous presentation on previous Meetup, there are some information about threading and also animation. So now we can use similar approach for animation, similar approach that we use on CSS animation. So you can see here, I have styles. I can animate this style just to make it animated. To do that, let me switch to the next branch and show you how the animation works. So it's a simple animation here. Okay, where is this render? Okay, render card. Yeah, here we are rendering the card. When we render the card, we are creating one animate value. This is a class that is provided by React Native. And okay, I'm passing this animated style to this view. Animated style is the same thing. It's a style card, and I added one small part to this, which is using animation. So let me explain better. What is happening here? We are having one value, which is 0, and we are changing that from 0 to 1. Based on that, we want to change something, one of the CSS props here. Here we are changing opacity. So when it changed from 0 to 1, we are changing the opacity to from 1 to 0. That means it's fading. Let's see that in action. If I click on myself here, you can see it fades out. When does this happen is here. When I click on the X, I start one animation here. So I say start the animation. The value is 0, so the final value will be 1. From 0 to 1, the duration 500. And this is the tricky part. Use native driver. Use native driver means that use operating system animation functionality to improve the animation speed. So if I change this to false, then the animation may be a little slower, because the problem is when I don't use native driver, the animation process will happen in JavaScript part. When I set this to true, the animation will happen on the native side, which is pretty fast. So let's some more animation. So I'm changing only opacity. Let's change something else like scale. So I want when I close the card to shrink. So I'm using transform attribute which accepts an array. I can then change the scale, for example. And this interpolation here tells the animation system how to map the value. That means, okay, that means when the animation value changes from 0 to 1, I want the scale to change from 1 to 0. That means when we are going through time, the scale will be closer to 0 and will shrink. So if I tap on this, it should, yeah, you can see it shrinks out. And at the end, will be removed. I can have something else here. I can have like what we have on HTML. We have rotation or rotate. Yeah, rotation. And I can give a value to rotation like this. So I'm saying when the animation value changes from 0 to 1, change the rotation. I can give it any value I want. So change from 0 degree to, for example, 100 degree, and rotate the card. I've got an error because I have put this here. In transform, we should have animations in separate objects, not together. Okay. Now it should work. I'm getting one error again. I think it's because of the way. Yeah, the problem was it is rotate, not rotation. It was my mistake. So let's see in action. When I click, you can see it's actually rotating and scaling down. The other animation I can add here is changing the color. So not in transform, I can change the color the same way we can map different range values from 0 to 1 to different colors. So I'm going to say change from white into red, for example, and it's going to crash. Oh, background color, sorry. I believe it's going to crash. I'm going to tell you why. Yeah, it crashed because remember this use native driver that process animation on mobile side? It doesn't support color animation for now, so only transform and other stuff. So if I change it to false, the animation will happen on JavaScript side, which is a little slower, but it will work. Come on. Yeah, you can see it changes to red. But native driver does not support that. We can have a bunch of different styles here for the animation. I can have multiple values. For example, from 0 to 0.5, then to 1, and have 3 different values. So what it says is when the value is 0 at the start, it's white. Half the way, it will turn to yellow, and from the middle to the end, it will turn to red. So I can have multiple values there. If I tab, yeah, you can see it changes to yellow, then to red. If I want to increase the duration, we can see that slower, yeah, it turns to yellow, then to red. So I think it's too much to provide in one talk. I'm going to the final branch, in which you can see the final result. I'm going to discard my changes and go to the final branch, which looks like this. It's the same thing. I just improved the styles. I have added one background image there. You can see I have comments in the code that will help you to understand. And if you have any question, you can always reach out to me. So we have one image background here, which is this one in the background. And we have the same flat list that we had before. Instead of using a solid color, I use an image background. And also for these cards, I changed the style a little bit to be transparent, semi-transparent. I changed that in the animation, yeah, here. 0.6, the start position. If I change to 1, I use RGB, it will be solid. Or if I use 0.1, it will be a lot more transparent and doesn't make any sense anymore. So this is the final code. You can go through that. I have written a lot of comments for every part. So if you have some knowledge in JSX or ReactJS on web, you can understand how it works. The hooks are similar to what we have on web. Fetch is the same function that we can use on web. Everything similar. Only thing different is the elements and how they will be translated into native elements on the mobile side at the runtime. So I hope you enjoyed this, and yeah, you can reach out to me if you have any question. I will be happy to answer. I think if anyone have any question, I'm here to answer. If not, I can transfer to Lee.
I have a question for you, Ali.
Sure.
So you mentioned that you used the flat list because it was
Right.
more performant than mapping.
Yes.
And so is that true with every JSX tag that you want to use? Like you don't want to use divs and spans?
On native, yes. On native, yes, because we need to discover what native elements are available for iOS, which is that UI that I showed you. Are you talking about web or React Native?
Well, so you answered my question that you like the React Native library provides those JSX components that
Yes.
map to the native
Exactly.
views. So then, have you used React Native Web before?
Sure.
So would Flatlist have a similar performance improvement where only the visible items would get rendered to the screen?
Yes, they did that, but it's not as performant as device. But yeah, it has. Also, you can, if I remember, yeah, we have some additional attributes that we can pass to Flatlist, even on React Native Web, that can adjust that performance, like this initial number to render. Or there is another one, if I remember, I don't remember now, but there is an article for that. So yeah, on web also we get more performance, and it recycles the elements out of view. But it's not as high performance as iOS because they are using direct pointers to the memory. But
Right.
it's much better than having a lot of elements rendered.
That's really cool.
It is, yeah. Any other question?
I had one quick question.
Sure.
I noticed for your styles, you're not using like any pixels or rem or anything. Is there just one default unit for native, or?
Oh, yeah, that's true. We are not using pixels. Uh, there is one unique uh, size unit that we are using, just numbers, but also we can use percentage as well. But if we want to have a different size on different screens, we have some utilities that is provided by React Native that we can do. So we can get the resolution of the device, and we have one scale function that we can scale these elements, these sizes using those utility functions. But most of the time, React Native does that automatically because we are using Flexbox, and we cannot also use absolute positioning, which is not recommended because it will slow down the native app. But as long as we are using Flexbox, we can do anything we want. But yeah, the unit is not pixels or rem. So it has its own unit, which they call point. Yeah.
Perfect, thanks.
No problem.